No, we'll just keep buying, right? The price is going to go up. It's going to get exponentially harder, and the price is going to go up exponentially higher, and we'll just keep buying. And at some point, if we get to 5% of the supply, Bitcoin's probably going to be $1 million a coin.
마이클 세일러는 마이크로스트래티지의 창업자이자 기업의 자산 전략에 비트코인을 정면으로 도입한 인물입니다. 이번 인터뷰에서 그는 비트코인의 본질적인 가치와 앞으로 자본시장에서 어떤 역할을 하게 될지 설명하는데요. 과연 비트코인이 단순한 자산을 넘어 새로운 자본 표준이 될 수 있을지 같이 확인해 보시죠.
That is, as every company in the world is like a type 1 diabetic. That is, they're unable to store economic energy, or their capital is toxic to them. They're actually suffering from toxic shock. So the world consists of right now of two capital assets you could use. You either use short-dated treasuries, and they're going to yield 2 to 3% after tax, or you use Bitcoin, which is yielding 50% plus. And the cost of capital is 12%, anywhere from 10 to 15% over the long term. But so if your capital asset gives you 2% and the cost of capital is 12%, that means that 10% of your capital value gets drained out of you every year. In essence, every company is losing 10% of their treasury a year in real value by using short-dated treasuries. It's against regs. It's illegal for a company to capitalize on a security. And so the general solution would be you ought to buy the S&P index, but they can't buy the S&P index. So every company that generates cash flow right now is left with this awful choice. I either have to dividend the capital back to the shareholders, I have to buy my stock back, which is surrender the capital, or I have to go and do a acquisition with the capital, and 95% of the acquisitions are dilutive mergers or disastrous mergers. You end up with these things like, a Google wants to pay like 60 times revenue, for a company. So why does the Bitcoin standard matter? For the first time in 100 years, companies have a capital asset, which is a commodity, not a security, which returns more than the cost of capital. That's the same as everybody on earth going from being a type 1 diabetic to having insulin to actually not being a diabetic. A type 1 diabetic will eat themselves to death. You can eat continuously forever and you will starve to death. And that's because you cannot retain energy. Companies are in essence starving themselves of capital. They're all negatively polarized to capital. They're repulsive to capital. They destroy all the capital they raise, and they're repelling it. The Bitcoin standard means your company becomes attractive to capital. You begin to attract it. The more capital you raise, the more shareholder value you create, the stronger you get. And so, to ask the question, why does it matter, is kind of like asking the question, why does insulin matter to a world full of type 1 diabetics? Or, why do you need to see, why do glasses matter to people that are nearsighted, right? It's so you can function. And that's, I think, the revolutionary opportunity here.
마이클 세일러는 오늘날 대부분의 기업들이 단기 국채에 자본을 묶어두며 매년 10%의 실질 자산 손실을 겪고 있다고 지적합니다. 비트코인은 자본 비용을 상회하는 높은 수익률을 가진 생산적인 자산이며 주식처럼 증권도 아니어서 기업들이 법적으로 보유할 수 있는 희소한 대안이라는 것이 마이클 세일러의 주장입니다. 또한 세일러는 비트코인이 기업의 자산 전략 중심에 들어서게 될 것이라 보고 있습니다. 자본을 보존하려는 글로벌 기업들이 본격적으로 비트코인을 매입하기 시작하면 이는 곧 전 세계적으로 수요가 급증하고 공급이 제한된 비트코인의 가격 상승으로 이어질 가능성이 크죠. 비트코인은 단순한 디지털 자산을 넘어 자본을 보존하고 성장시키려는 기업들의 생존 전략 역할을 수행하게 될 것이라 생각됩니다.
Is there a ceiling that MicroStrategy has in mind in terms of how much Bitcoin it can hold? Or, is it kind of unlimited and really depends on what is happening in the market?
No, we'll just keep buying, right? The price is going to go up. it's going to get exponentially harder and the price is going to go up exponentially higher and we'll just keep buying. And at some point, if we get to 5% of the supply, Bitcoin's probably going to be $1 million a coin. And if we get to 7.5% of the supply, Bitcoin will be 10 million a coin. And then we'll be, if I'm lucky enough to grind to 10% of the supply, Bitcoin's going to be 50 million a coin and someone will be whining that whatever, we have too much Bitcoin, but other people will have $400 trillion of wealth, so, our view is it's a ratchet and we're just going to keep cranking on the ratchet and there's massive leverage here. And I think everybody's winning if we do that.
Hey, can you quickly touch on how you plan to make some of the assets productive directly on the balance sheet, or is there any plan? I know you touched on it previously, but I don't think you were.
No, the point
really
is they are productive. That's what people keep missing. Like we generated $12 billion of BTC gain last year. That's like earnings to the common stock investors. We've set a target of $10 billion or more of BTC dollar gain this year. That's like earnings. It is productive, right? And how is it? It's kind of like the frustrating thing is, say I owned 100 acres of Manhattan and I owned it and you put buildings on it, right? And then you said, well, when are you going to make the 100 acres productive? Well, they're holding the buildings up. I'm getting paid rent, like I'm holding the buildings up. It is productive. If the Bitcoin serves as collateral to the convertible bonds, to the preferred stock, and to the equity and to the options market, it is productive, right? That's why we're succeeding, because we're able to see it in a different way than other people. You don't need to rehypothecate it. You don't need to. It's like you don't need to juggle the granite blocks. You could just put the building on the granite block and it would be productive. So we're using it as collateral. And you're like, well, how valuable that? Well, if it's worth 10 billion last year or more, then at the point it's worth 100 billion a year, aren't we making more money than everybody else in the entire financial world just by using it as collateral? Why do you need a second idea? I mean, it's perfectly fine now.
There was one that asked about your thought for Bitcoin as store of value. Jack Dorsey previously said that it has to also be medium of exchange and has to be slightly more productive than just store of value. What's your opinion on that personally?
I don't agree. Like gold is not a medium of exchange and it's worth $20 trillion. Real estate is not a medium of exchange and it's worth $300 trillion. The S&P index or, equity is not a medium exchange. Art, Picassos are not mediums of exchange and they're worth a lot of money. So the world's full of sports teams are not a medium of exchange and they're worth a lot of money. In fact, one could argue that every rich person on earth is rich because they own something that is not a medium of exchange, right? Name one person that's rich. Name a person, is anybody that where the majority of their wealth is holding an asset that is in a medium of exchange. So I think there's, $1,000 trillion worth of stuff in the world that's not a medium of exchange. And it has value because it's capital. So in this particular case, my position is Bitcoin is capital. And what's the value of it? The value of it is that there's people with $500 trillion of wealth that want to keep their money, right? And right now, their money is being destroyed at the rate of 3 to 5% a year. Think about every single capital asset on earth right now that's being debased by inflation, by tariffs, by war, by chaos, by entropy. So right now, that's a $10 trillion a year lapse. If you could avoid losing $10 trillion a year, right, what would that be worth to you? Right? A lot. So I think it is, by the way, it's important that you be able to settle peer-to-peer. Like, I think it's important that you be able to self-custody Bitcoin. I would agree on that. I agree. I agree that any of 400 million companies should be able to custody Bitcoin, settle Bitcoin, trade Bitcoin. But I would stop short of saying it needs to be a medium of exchange. I think the medium of exchange is simply a currency application. And I think that maybe, the value of that is $10 trillion or something. I think the value of capital is $500 trillion. So I think the store of value is so much greater than the medium of exchange that it's a mistake to focus upon medium exchange. I think that's a very competitive market, right? The yen, the euro, the dollar, the ruble, the real are all going to compete. It's a competitive market and it's not worth nearly as much. And also, I think that if you're a company or if you're a citizen, you can hold a store of value asset comfortably. Bernard Arnault, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, right, and Elon Musk, they can all hold $100 billion worth of non-medium of exchange assets and be wealthy and powerful and influential, and it's non-controversial. So the issue is, do you want to win or do you want to fight? And my view is what you want to do is you want to win, right? I'd rather win and not fight than fight and not win.
세일러는 비트코인 보유에 상한선은 없다며 시장이 어떻게 움직이든 계속해서 비트코인을 매집할 것이라고 강조했습니다. 마이크로스트래티지가 전체 공급량의 5에서 10%를 보유하게 된다면 비트코인의 희소성에 따라 비트코인당 100만 달러에서 최대 5천만 달러까지 상승할 수 있다는 것인데요. 세일러는 비트코인을 단순한 디지털 자산이 아니라 금이나 부동산처럼 실물 자산에 버금가는 가치 저장 수단이자 생산적인 자본 자산으로 바라봅니다. 예를 들어 피카소의 그림은 실제로 돈을 주고 자주 사고 파는 물건은 아니지만 누구도 그 자산의 가치를 의심하지 않습니다. 이처럼 비트코인이 일상적인 교환 수단이 아니더라도 비트코인도 그 자체로 자산의 무게를 가진다는 게 그의 핵심 논리입니다. 지금 전 세계 자산의 상당 부분이 인플레이션과 혼란 속에서 가치가 훼손되고 있는 가운데 자산을 보존하고 담보화하며 실질 수익까지 낼 수 있는 비트코인은 글로벌 자본 흐름의 중심으로 자리매김할 것으로 생각됩니다. 그리고 혹시 거래 수수료 절반을 다시 환급받는 방법 아직 모르시나요? 단 5분만 투자하면 평생 수수료 돌려받는 셀퍼럴 선택이 아닌 필수입니다. 자세한 내용은 영상 더보기란을 확인해보세요. 마지막으로 마이클 세일러의 유명한 연설 한마디와 함께 영상 마치겠습니다.
Everybody gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. Okay? I got the price I deserved.
사람들은 각자 자신의 그릇만큼의 가격에 비트코인을 갖게 된다. 영상 도움이 되셨다면 구독 똑, 좋아요 똑 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.